Now that the fight for new stadiums has ended, the fight for minority hire, the plan for minority and non-union hiring has been scrutinized and now will be examined. Up next on Inside Pittsburgh.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for another edition of Inside Pittsburgh. I'm Sheldon Ingram. A very sensitive issue is brewing, has been brewing, and will continue to as long as the stadium construction will go underway here in Pittsburgh for the Pirates and the Steelers. Joining me now are Representative Bill Robinson and Calvin Clinton from the African American Workers Union here in Pittsburgh. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
The issue of hiring minorities is a pretty sensitive issue within the African American community and apparently even with some of the trade unions here in the city. Representative Robinson, you're very leery of attempts right now to hire minorities, women and African Americans for these stadium projects.
Well, Sheldon, I think the worst case scenario would be for 200 people to be building a stadium and 2,000 people standing around watching them. And I think that's the direction that we're going. For all the good that the unions have done in this community, and they certainly have done a lot of good, they seem to be very reluctant to, one, include more people of color and more women. By their own admission, they don't have enough people over the next 7 years to handle all the projects that are planned for Allegheny County, much less southwestern Pennsylvania. And they're willing to bring in people from other cities and other states when we have people right here in this community who want to work, who could be trained. And so I think the unions still have another mile to go if they're sincere about being part of a new Allegheny County.
I mean, with Calvin, I'm sorry, did the unions or has the establishment said they would not hire minorities to work on these stadium projects?
Well, I think the proof is in the pudding in terms of the historic nature of the lack of inclusion of African Americans, minorities, and women in construction. Tom Flaherty did a report back in 1995-96 that showed that 84% of all the workers on construction sites, which city taxpayers paid for, came from outside the city. And then a further analysis proved that of the 16% of city residents that were involved in the over $144 million of work, only less than 3% of those were African Americans. So there's a lot more to be done in terms of inclusion in the unions, and the African American Workers Union would like to be a part and will be a part in terms of trying to change that.
But there is some moving legislation here in the city called Pittsburgh Works,
yes,
which states that minorities and women should be, and I guess will be, hired for these positions,
yes,
for labor and trade to build these stadiums. You guys aren't sold on that at all?
No, I support the concepts in Councilman Salahuddin's legislation. I think he's right on target.
He's the architect of this legislation.
In terms of trying to make sure that Pittsburghers have an opportunity to participate in rebuilding their own city. And I think he's right on target in requesting the cooperation and assistance of the unions. I think Calvin's point is well taken. I am not a union member now, and so I can't speak for what happens inside the unions. But the Allegheny Labor Council would be much better off if the African American Workers Union were a membership organization so that some of these issues could be worked out with people who are in labor unions. One of the difficulties for us as elected officials is that oftentimes when we represent issues and we push for our constituents, we don't have the expertise ourselves. We need labor people talking to labor people, we need business people talking to business people, and we need elected officials talking to elected officials.
Now, when Salahuddin and this oversight task force created Pittsburgh Works legislation, the African American Workers Union was not included in discussions at all?
Well, initially we were not at the table with the organization, the Minority Oversight Review Committee. We were speaking to members of that committee to work out language which would be inclusive of the African American Workers Union and other unions that were independent unions that might provide more entree for African American and other minorities into construction.
But when Pittsburgh Works, the task force or the oversight committee, when they began talking to various unions, they did not include you in the discussion?
No, we weren't at the table with that. The chairman of that, Salahuddin, did have some discussions, and we felt that it would have been more productive had we been in the same room discussing labor matters.
How many members are in your union?
Well, right now we're less than 1,000 members, less than 1,000 members, but it's something that we're growing and trying to do, and we intend through the process of Plan B to add about 1,000 members.
Are you fully accredited?
Yes, we are.
By the state?
National Labor Relations Board has adjudicated us on several occasions as far as our status as a union. Now, as far as our apprenticeship program, it is fully certified by the state and federal governments. And all we needed was the support of financing to pay for the tuition of some of our students to go through the training that we would be providing. And we were fortunate enough that Mike DeWita and Bob Cramner and Mulugata Baru continued to work with us despite a lot of pressure from some of the unions not to work with us to establish this program.
We want to go to the definition of Pittsburgh work, to what this is all about. It's a oversight committee that's supposed to oversee the hiring of African Americans and women. It says the Pittsburgh work declares that residents of the city, including minorities and women, deserve a fair opportunity for employment, apprenticeship, journey worker, and other training opportunities made possible from construction contracts paid in whole or in part by public tax dollars, meaning primarily these stadiums. It goes on to say for the hiring, the numbers regarding the hiring practices, that 50% of the total employee workforce shall be performed by City of Pittsburgh residents. Number two is really the part that everyone is paying attention to. 25% of total work hours shall be performed by minorities. 10% of total employee work shall be performed by women.
Yes.
This is the highlight in the meat and potatoes of this legislation.
Exactly.
Representative Robinson, you don't think that legislation is going to stick when it comes to hiring minorities down the road?
Well, I think there's going to be a great deal of difficulty in getting the legislation passed. That's something that Councilman Udine will have to work on. But I think really the essence of this is there has to be the political leadership in the community to address this issue of who works and who doesn't work. There has to be political leadership around who are the people who are going to participate in Plan B, who are going to participate in the growth of this city. Just as the Rooneys and the McClatchys and others, the Mascaros, the Dick Corporations and others got involved in this process, they didn't need legislation to get involved. They were able to sit and negotiate based on their proven track record. And I think the same should be the case for minorities and women. If there are elected officials who truly are concerned that everybody should be involved, then I think they need to use time-tested methods. The best way to get Bill Robinson or Calvin Clinton or Sheldon Ingram involved is to call them and to sit down with them in private and talk about their involvement.
But now this 2510 legislation in Pittsburgh works, is it not binding? I mean, what lack of faith do you have in this legislation?
Well, like Representative Robinson had stated, it's a matter of first you have to get the legislation passed. Then it has to be adhered to once it is passed, if it's not challenged by some of the unions that I know for a fact are against the legislation. If there is to be some kind of resolution here, it's going to take strong political will, the same type of political will that was a part of Plan B, C, or T, whichever adjective or whichever letter you'd like to use. But the reality is that it's about people in the community that pay the bills and that are a part of providing the resources for these entities to be built, to be a part of the process on the receiving end, to get a return on their investment in terms of their tax dollars and be able to feed their families, be able to build their communities. And that's what we would like to see, that it's inclusive of the total community.
Is there any mechanism to enforce this legislation, the 2510?
I'm not aware of that, and we need to make it clear that this legislation is separate and apart from the efforts of the Oversight Committee as it relates to Plan B and their attempts to provide 25% minority participation in the construction and service area and 10% for women in construction service. Two separate things, two separate processes.
Okay, we're going to take a break and we'll come back and talk about the ramifications of not hiring minorities and women for the stadium projects. This is Inside Pittsburgh. Stay with us.
bigger picture. This is not just about stadiums and convention centers. It is about financial centers and world headquarters and hotels and retailing and a lot of other developments.
This stadium complex and this convention center is the catalyst for an unprecedented renaissance in our region.
And as stadium construction prepares for the immediate future, a lot of concern over the hiring of minorities and women for these construction and trade jobs continues to be a hot issue. And Kelvin, I want to ask you, what's your impression to the notion that the Union Trade Council here in Pittsburgh told me on one occasion that they have tried to actively recruit African Americans to come into the unions, but either there aren't enough or people aren't signing up?
Well, I believe that there's been such a history of a lot of problems in terms of good faith with the unions in the past, in terms of their sign-ups through the apprenticeship programs that they have every year. And this has left a bitter taste in a lot of people's mouths that has also been transferred to some of the younger people that have followed their fathers, their uncles, and their aunts and mothers that have tried to go into the skilled trades, and they just feel like it's not going to be the real thing. It's going to be a smokescreen for a period of time, and then it's going to go away. I was just down at the construction site down at Mellon Center, the new Mellon Center, and I seen an African American male outside the gate. I had walked around the whole site. I didn't see any African Americans inside working. When I talked to him, I said, "Well, brother, are you the Sentinel? I mean, are you out here to make it seem like there's a lot of African Americans inside there?" He said, "You know something?" He said, "They've been doing it for a long time. I'm out here just standing." And so the idea is that everybody riding by would see this African American guy right at the gate just basically pacing back and forth, and it make it seem like there was some kind of a reciprocal type of relationship inside, but that's not what the reality is. So when you talk about what's real and what's fantasy, a lot of people are tired of the fantasy. They want what's real. It's going to mean something to them.
It sounds like you identified two areas that might be obstacles or are obstacles in preventing minorities from being hired for some of these construction jobs.